Greetings everyone, this is Lucian Vâlsan broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff broadcasting from the United States, sitting in the background making sure everything works just fine. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson.
Good evening. How are you doing this fine evening?
Well, I was doing fine until 10 minutes ago when I learned that I was banned from Facebook again. For, I don't know, I think it's the 7th or 8th time this year. So yeah, I was doing just fine until 10 minutes ago. Now I'm still doing fine because I don't really give a shit, but at least I have to pretend that I'm affected by this.
So what terrible deed did you do this time?
I think I offended the minorities this time. Apparently, a social justice warrior had a problem with me sharing my last video on my channel, which is a parody of an article that we're going to read during this show. And apparently, saying niggerhood too many times, even satirically, that it's a problem. Whatever. And also, they didn't like a picture of a 1928 electoral poster that I posted in a private group. It said that those who vote for the Labour essentially are voting for Moscow. So apparently that's offensive now, even though
Okay.
it's not Creative Commons, what public domain, and a legitimate poster from the archives of the Swedish state, but apparently that's offensive. So yeah, for these two essentially.
Okay.
Well, seems Zuckerberg legit. How are you doing this fine evening? I'm sure you haven't been banned on social media.
No, I haven't been banned from anywhere. Sort of exhausted after a long week, but I'm looking forward to doing the show.
Yeah, this day has been better. Yesterday I have had an extremely full day, and yeah. The good thing that I want to mention is that the weather is still maintaining itself, at least during the day, at extremely acceptable levels. During the night, on the other hand, it's quite a difficulty to get out from the house without using thick winter clothes.
Yeah, over here the weather's been quite okay the last week. Not really any rain for the most part, and temperature sort of still kind of moderate.
Yep. Okay, then I guess we should proceed because we have quite a few items to bring to the table.
Okay, the first one is from IB Times from the UK. EU rules to make UK porn filters illegal, or so it thought. The European Union has ruled the UK's internet porn filters imposed by service providers are illegal and will effectively be removed by the end of 2015, or so it thought. Despite the ruling, Prime Minister David Cameron has claimed he has agreed a veto to the legislation that will allow the UK to continue to block pornographic sites. As part of the EU net neutrality laws, which were passed on 27 October, it stated internet service providers in Europe are required to treat online traffic, quote, without discrimination, restriction, or interference. This encompassed the porn block introduced by the Conservative government in 2013 and saw some ISP activate a filter by default unless people chose to opt out. When the gavel came down on the EU's decision to deem the porn filter illegal, it came as a shock to Cameron, who vehemently enforced the introduction the filters. I think this doesn't make any sense. Okay. He told MPs at Prime Minister's questions, I spluttered over my cornflakes when I read my Daily Mail this morning because we worked so hard to put in place these filters. But I can reassure that we secured an opt-out yesterday so we can keep our family-friendly filters to protect children. I can tell the House that we will legislate to put our agreement with internet companies on this issue into the law of the land so our children will be protected. The UK government has essentially stuck its tongue out at the EU ruling and aims to bypass the law by intending to bring in new EU legislation. Sorry, I can't read today. Bring in new UK legislation before the EU's comes into effect as of April 2016. However, panicked parents cannot breathe a sigh of relief just yet, as the new law Cameron intends to introduce could be challenged in the European Court of Justice and be ruled out for being more restrictive than the EU legislation. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the first reaction one can have. I mean, Britain has had so many problems with the with EU overruling their own legislation, considering that the UK law usually was better than EU law, and in the one case when the EU was actually more in the right than the local legislation, that's exactly where Mr. Cameron will fight for an opt-out. Seriously? And also, why does he even insist that much on these bloody filters? I mean, the position to censor the internet is not really politically advantageous for him. I mean, it's not like he won the elections running on the porn filter platform or something. And, you know, I mean, I don't know, they have an in-out referendum with the EU in 2016. I mean, surely he has more politically advantageous positions to take with regards to the European Union than this petty quibble.
Yeah, and especially because Cameron wants to stay in the EU. So, I mean, picking meaningless fights might be good if you want to get out of the EU, but that doesn't seem to be his goal. So it's, I agree with you that it's really quite strange why he's taking a stand on this issue.
Yeah, and you know, it has been revealed that Cameron allegedly has had sex with a dead pig or something like that, which made the movie Black Mirror some sort of a prophecy. Yet he wants porn filters. In all seriousness, though, have you read the net neutrality guidelines of the EU?
Nope.
I mean, yeah, sure, they make a lot more sense than the UK's porn filters, but they're still insane. I mean, you know, I read portions of them because, you know, using my contacts in the telecom industry, and you know, the local players in here in Romania said that we're gonna show a middle finger to the EU as well, because you know, in here, as I explained in one of my older videos, in here we don't have net neutrality. Companies can do whatever they please with the traffic, and that's what makes this country the fastest in Europe in terms of the internet. And yes, there is discriminatory traffic. For instance, if I want to watch a live stream football match, it's better to go to the website of my provider as opposed to the competition, because you know, the provider works in like 1.5 seconds, the competition takes 7 or 8 seconds to load. So you know, there is this kind of discriminatory traffic, and I don't think that's wrong.
Yeah, me neither. This sort of issue of net neutrality has always struck me as kind of strange. Why, like, all the, you know, fashionable technophile people all just seem to take it for granted that net neutrality is a good thing and desirable, and that we obviously must protect it, etc., etc. It just seems really strange. Like we don't have I don't know, neutrality in, say, football stadiums. I mean, you know, there's some seats that are better than others, and that doesn't mean that football is now ruined.
Yes, yes, and you know, and of course, some competitions are better rewarded than others, and and that doesn't mean the sport itself is ruined. Yes, and it's also this stance that, you know, we have to protect net neutrality, which implies that the internet has been neutral until now, which is far from the truth. The internet has never been neutral.
Yeah, like in Germany, there's all these articles coming out in the last couple of days, you know, bemoaning the end of net neutrality, and that these new EU rules are completely disingenuous, and they hollow out net neutrality and blah blah blah. But I don't really see what the problem is. But I haven't looked into these kinds of rules in any detail, so. I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, the only quibble that at least the freest, and I have to say it, and I know this is going to offend a lot of people, but the freest telecom sector in Europe is in Romania. So the only quibble in the freest telecom sector in Europe is this thing that it says that companies should not discriminate at all with the traffic, including into, I don't know, for instance, including technical limitations, because it's very simple. If I am your internet service provider, it's obvious that my own websites will load faster because you're using my DNS servers, and of course you're going to get faster from here to the next neighborhood where the website is being hosted than from here to Norway. It's not rocket science. Yet, according to the EU, that's illegal, and the ISP should do something in order to avoid this discrimination. It's
Maybe
retarded.
maybe they can just put in some sort of artificial wait time. If you're looking up your own ISP's provider, they just have to put you on hold for a couple of seconds to make everything
Yeah.
equal.
Yeah, 2081 Vonnegut style. Put in some more artificial handicaps so everyone would be equal. Yeah, that's the only quibble that, at least for now, the telecom sector in this country has. As for the internet port, my problem is exactly because it's a filter. It doesn't matter to me if it filters porn or if it filters, I don't know, kafir content, as is the case in the Great Islamic Republic of Iran, or filthy capitalist Western imperialist propaganda, as it's the case in the Great People's Republic of China. To me, all filters are the same, and they pose the same issue. I don't care what exactly they're supposed to filter. And I know that the
Yeah, and the
British
problem is that
listeners
this
tend
is
to
sort of
go ahead.
yeah. The problem is that this is sort of that the ISPs are sort of being strung into having these filters as a default option. I mean, if they were just offering these options that you can turn it on if you want to, that would be completely fine. But sort of forcing the providers to have that as a default option and forcing people to opt out if they actually want to look at porn, that is what I take issue with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is this thing. I mean, I think Virgin Media. I could be wrong, but there was a UK provider that was providing these kinds of filters as an opt-out long before this legislation existed. And although I think that's idiotic, at least you had the alternative. Don't subscribe to Virgin if you disagree with their policy. But forcing all of them, yes, that is indeed messed up. And and again, how this argument that it protects the children is so asinine that it beggars belief, isn't it?
Yep, yep.
How the hell would indeed children be protected? I mean, it's not like it takes 10 seconds to find out a tutorial on Google on how to use VPNs and bypass all the censorship firewalls ever invented by any government for the civilian population.
Yeah, but I guess it filters out probably most people. Like, yeah, I mean, setting up a VPN is not particularly difficult, but still, it's an extra hurdle that people have to jump over, and a lot of times people are just going to say, ah, I'm not going to bother with that. Though, I
Yeah, but
mean, there's a lot of people who take internet porn pretty seriously, so.
no, but then again, I mean, I'm thinking as someone who was 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, uh, and if someone would tell me that I can't do something, the first instinct would be let's try to find out how can we bypass that particular rule. That's how I used to think. That's how I think today. If someone tells me that I can't do something, then my first instinct is to let's see how we can work around that. uh, my first instinct is not okay. Then I'm going to obey the regulation. No, fuck you and your rules.
Yeah, but the typical case, most people are not that, um, like, most people are not contrarians by nature.
Yeah, most people aren't extremists. That's what you're trying to say.
No, I meant contrarians.
No, of course. Also, Mean Gene reminds us in the chat room that for one of the UK providers, AVFM is being filtered out as offensive material. And this reminds me that the UK filter is also meant to filter out also so-called offensive content, not just pornographic websites, which is something that is usually absent from the media. They rarely mention it. And I'm surprised that nobody sees a problem with that. I mean, it's not like, okay, I don't particularly like the idea that AVFM is being filtered out, but I don't really care. But, the slippery slope of this, why should the government have the power to decide what's offensive and what isn't?
Yeah, and I mean, just because some people are offended by something, that argument that this means it should be banned is pretty flimsy. I mean, what about the website of any political party? I mean, no matter what
Yes,
party you pick, there's a lot of people who find the ideas that they promote offensive. So should
absolutely,
we
yes.
should we ban all political speech on the internet too?
Yeah, only what the big brother approves. That's how we do it. That's how it should roll in InkSoc. Yeah, whatever. It's sickening, really, and it is really sad that the government is still very much in favor of these kinds of things. And this pretty much proves what you particularly brought up when it was that UN report thing. Some governments, the UK government notwithstanding, are going to enact insane policies regardless of what the UN is telling them. You remember we were addressing the concern of a listener who said that, well, now I can surely see Cameron rubbing his hands to use the UN report to censor the internet even further. Well, there you go. The UN report was dismantled, and the censorship still continues.
Yeah, I mean, the UN just doesn't have a lot of influence over relatively powerful countries like the UK.
Yep. Okay. Sticking on the topic of free speech, going further in the next article, coming from the Daily Mail, Oxford University in censorship row as police seize copies of offensive student magazine. Oxford University is embroiled in a censorship row after police confiscated 150 copies of a controversial student magazine. The officers were called by student union leaders who claimed the No Offense magazine might upset rape victims and people from ethnic minorities. Editor Jacob Williams said he was prevented from distributing the magazines. He feared being arrested as Thames Valley police decided whether he had committed a crime, but they have now decided that no further action will be taken. The founders of the magazine claim it was set up in response to a crisis of faith in the idea of free speech at universities. Gee, I think. It is described as being devoted to free speech and warns readers expect to be offended. It has attracted controversy for articles including a defense of colonialism and an article entitled Islam is not a religion of peace. It also includes a satirical article about organizing a rape swagger in the style of a slut walk, marches organized as protest against a woman's style of dress as an excuse for rape. No Offense was banned from this year's Freshers' Fair by the student union, which said it was offensive, and when Mr. Williams tried to distribute the magazine in Oxford High Street instead, union representatives reported him to the police. Mr. William, 21, a politics, philosophy, and economics student at Exeter College, said officers told him that handing out the magazine may constitute a public order offense. I have been sitting for nearly 2 weeks not knowing if I was going to be arrested over this, he said. I have been very worried. He accuses officers of acting in a heavy-handed way and added, quote, it is incredibly important people are given the opportunity to engage with different ideas. The student union isn't in the business of protecting people from ideas they don't like. Oh, yes, they are. Union official Kiran Benipal said the magazine was offensive, and she alerted the authorities after a complaint from a fresher who was also a survivor of sexual assault. Officers from Thames Valley Police approached the magazine stand while it was unattended and took all the 150 copies to assess whether the content was obscene. A spokesman said they were worried that the magazine containing offensive and distressing material was being distributed. An officer deemed it was not obscene and arranged for the issue to be left at a university college. The student union and the university declined to comment. Is it me, or this sounds like, hello, internet police, the internet has said something mean and I got sand in my vagina now? Seriously, you're gonna call the police because a magazine defending colonialism is being distributed? Really?
Yeah, and it's not like these opinions are completely outrageous. Like like it's certainly possible to make a reasonable case that colonialism was or not a good thing. I mean, I don't know if I agree with that, but it's certainly an argument worth having, and it's not it's at least a position that is not obviously wrong. Just like it's at least not obviously wrong that Islam, a religion that was at least in its first couple of centuries primarily spread through conquest, is not a religion of peace. I mean, there's reasonable arguments that can be made in favor of these positions, and if that offends some people, well, I think they have to get a thicker skin,
Yeah,
or just, I don't know, like not read the magazine.
yeah, that would be the obvious solution. And yes, I can understand why some may not agree, but uh, nobody's forcing you to agree, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're shouting this from the rooftops. They are printing a magazine that that explicitly says that we will have we have opinions that some people consider offensive and so on. And well, if you choose to read it anyway, then uh, then
It's on you.
yeah, I mean. Uh, there's apparently some people who are just that they were just completely offended by by the idea that someone somewhere is having an opinion that is uh, that is not compatible with their own. It's why don't you just ignore people who have other opinions? I mean, I just don't understand this attitude at all.
Yeah, it's a pretty totalitarian kind of attitude. I mean, can you imagine someone disagrees with me in a pool of whatever thousands of people, how many there are at Oxford? Someone disagrees in that huge institution. Amazing. Can you believe it?
Yeah,
Really? Really? And the reason I included this in the segment is because we covered also the fact that the magazine was banned from the Freshers' Fair and whatnot. They weren't content with that. They had to call the police to come in and confiscate everything. They weren't content to just kicking them out from the space that they allegedly controlled, which I think they shouldn't, but whatever. They weren't content with that.
yeah. I mean, yeah. It just this attitude just never ceases to amaze me. I mean, I'm basically surrounded all the time by people who disagree with me on a very wide range of things, and who would consider many of my opinions to be outrageous and so on. But somehow I deal with that just fine. I don't break down crying because someone thinks something that I think is outrageous.
Yeah, yeah, same here. I mean, I've never had this entitlement mentality to expect that every single individual on the planet, or at least every single individual in the proximity of me, should agree with me on everything. I don't consider myself entitled to that, or consider myself entitled to have my opinions, however wrong or correct, be protected by the force of the state. I've never considered myself entitled to that. Yet for some reasons, some students seem to be perfectly fine with that.
Yep.
And it again boils down to this thing with student unions. I can't imagine this happening in a university in France or in Germany. I mean, I remember you brought up that piece of news where the Trotsky student union complained that a professor was being offensive. And the university administration just essentially shrugged it off and said, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course these students do exist in German universities too, but
Yeah, but they're not
uh,
given the power to censor.
yeah, for the most part not, no.
No. Amazing. Okay, sticking up into media narratives and to the great United Kingdom. Going to the next one. Go ahead.
Okay, this one is from Closer Online, again from the UK. Teacher gets abortion after conducting 3-year affair with boy of 10. A teacher who conducted an affair with a 10-year-old boy had an abortion after becoming pregnant with his child, a court has heard. The woman, who cannot be named, conducted a 3-year affair with a youngster between 2011 and 2014, grooming him from the age of 10. Wellington High Court heard how the boy and other children would visit the teacher's house and that she and the boy kissed, had sex, and shared intimate snaps with one another. And despite the boy trying to end the relationship way back in 2011, the relationship continued regardless, with the woman even falling pregnant with the boy's baby. She later had an abortion, something she admitted to him after having sex in a motel room. However, Stephen Irons, the teacher's lawyer, claims the boy was infatuated with his teacher and made up stories about their relationship. He was unable to explain how the boys managed to get hold of explicit photos of her. The trial continues.
An affair.
Yeah.
An affair. That's what we call now women raping 10-year-old boys. An affair.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
it's not just any woman; it's also the boy's teacher, who is an authority figure who has power over him.
Yeah, whatever. I personally I don't make these kinds of distinctions. But then again, I'm a very immoral person who. But it doesn't matter if it's his teacher or his mother or whatever. He's 10. I think the
Or
argument
at
should
least,
end
or at
there.
least he was 10 when the thing started.
Yeah, whatever. Uh, and I like how the author of this article phrased it. Well, the teacher's lawyer says that the victim was infatuated with their relationship, but was unable to explain how the victim managed to get hold of explicit photos of the defendant. It's a very clever way of formulating it, but still, an affair.
Yeah, they would never call it that if it was a man.
Yeah, I don't imagine myself that teacher forces 10-year-old girl to get abortion after conducting a 3-year affair. I don't imagine such kind of headline beat written with a straight face. I just don't. I can't. And if that were to happen, I think pitchforks would be seen on the horizon and whatnot.
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. And uh, am I the only one who expects a very light sentence?
Yeah, probably.
And this is one of those cases where I do agree with those who say that the sentences should be equally high. Because it's one thing when it's the teacher with the 15-year-old. There I don't really disagree with I don't really agree with most of the people. I don't think that should be such a severe crime. But if it's a teacher with a 10-year-old, I do agree that the sentences should be equally high regardless of the sex of the perpetrator. This is insane.
Yeah.
Okay, remaining within the United Kingdom, but moving a bit westwards to the Wales. From walesonline.co.uk, Jim accused of being sexist after setting different membership fees for men and women. An old-school muscle gym, due to open in Neath, Port Talbot next month, has changed its membership prices after accusations of being a bit sexist. The Doghouse Gym, which is due to open on Alfred Street, Neath, on November the 2nd, initially said a monthly subscription would cost £20 for men, but £15 for women and students. Writing on the gym's Facebook page, Jules Williams said, quote, "Question for you. Why the different prices for men and women? That's a bit sexist unless you give me a really good reason." The owners responded by saying that the price difference was intended to encourage more women to sign up. Owner Adrian Jones said, quote, "We have found our type of gym is male-oriented and we would like to encourage more women to join a male-dominated activity. It is a decision we made and understand that some people will not agree with our decision. We also understand that no matter what our explanation is, some people will not be satisfied. We welcome all comments, positive and negative, as they can only be used to improve our business." Mr. Williams suggested that there should be one price for both men and women, plus a discount for students and job seekers. He added, quote, "I had been really looking forward to joining for a long time, but this is not right. Your decision on this is totally wrong, and I'm sorry to say I will not be joining. It's a shame." Liam Andrews said he did not believe the difference in membership price was important. He said, quote, "I couldn't give a monkeys if a woman was paying less than me. What I'd be looking at is the facilities, the equipment, and how it's run. I'm there for one thing only, to train, not to socialize. I wanted to know what the gym can offer me as an athlete and a customer." A few hours later, after the initial post, the gym confirmed that both men and women would be charged £20 a month for membership with a £5 discount for the first month. They said, quote, "We appreciate all feedback, so we are a new business and rely on feedback as suggestions to ensure our members are happy." The spectacular aspect of this is that the dispute was resolved the free market way, as opposed to Austria, where these kinds of disputes have lately been solved by suing to the discrimination board and all sorts of state-enforced measures.
On the other hand, I agree completely with what Neil Andrews said, that it doesn't really matter whether women pay less or more. I guess it sort of plays to these sort of egalitarian sentiments, which I don't have. But I don't really care whether other people pay more or less than me. It just matters to me what I pay and what I get in return. And I find it really interesting that but this person who complained that it's completely sexist to charge women less, but it's completely fine to charge students less. So he's completely fine with price discrimination, just as long as it's discriminating based on lines he approves of, and if not, that's outrageous.
Yeah, but and this is pretty much standard across Europe. It's okay to have price discrimination based on age and based on levels of education, maybe, but it's not okay to have price discrimination based on, I don't know, geographical origin or sex or whatnot. Uh, be Quite frankly, I think I think all price discriminations are okay, and I know that a lot of people are going to be offended for me saying that. But I think it should be in the freedom of any business to practice price discrimination however they deem fit. That doesn't mean that their discrimination should be necessarily upheld. I mean, the community could still revolt and just boycott them.
Yeah, and they really need to boycott them. It's just enough to not consume the service
Hmm.
if they're charging you a higher price.
Hmm. Hmm. And yeah,
Like,
that's the beauty of this particular case, that it was just prospect customers or real customers complained and said, look, I'm not going to consume your product because you're doing this, fuck off. And they essentially mediated it without the state intervention. That's what I liked about this case.
yeah, I don't know what kind of area this is, but it, I would guess it sort of depends on how many other gyms are in the neighborhood. Because if it's like some sort of city where there's a couple of other alternatives nearby, then price discrimination does not really work, because for it to work, it requires some sort of monopoly power that's because otherwise the people you are discriminating against can just go to another provider and get get the same service for a lower price, and then you only get basically the customers that you're selecting for, so that you discriminate in favor of, so that you basically just end up selling your product at a lower price, which is not what you want when you're price discriminating. So for that strategy to be actually successful, it requires you to be in some way offering a unique product that you can't get anywhere else in the vicinity.
Or to have a particularly relevant competitive advantage. I'm thinking, for instance, a gentleman's club. Now, in the modern understanding of that, it's essentially a pub. And, there are a lot of other pubs, but they're not gentlemen's clubs. So they do practice some various sorts of discrimination, either on class or on sex or both. But they do offer some particular exclusivity, and that's their competitive advantage. And whilst there are indeed
But
similar or even identical services nearby, they still do have customers, and sometimes they actually do sell stuff at higher prices than their competition.
that's not really an example of price discrimination. That's just an example of being sort of selective in what sort of
Yeah,
customers
yeah,
you accept.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's a
sure.
very different economic concept.
Yeah, but no, okay, let's take an example from this city. For instance, the cinemas in this city. Some of them practice price discrimination. They sell tickets a lot lower for students, and many others don't practice that kind of. And yet they somehow both manage to survive and to uh, actually have the halls full whenever a popular movie arrives in town and things like that.
Yeah, but the question is, are there other cinemas sort of in the same kind of neighborhood that are offering
Hmm.
a similar service? Like for example, the city where I live in, there's like one like big multiplex cinema that is basically unique in the whole city. And if you want to have uh, if you want to have the sort of big sort of really big screen, the sort of up-to-date sound systems and so on, then there's only basically this one cinema you can go to in the city. And if you there's a bunch of smaller cinemas, but they have their own sort of distinguishing marks that set them off from the crowd, and therefore give each of them some sort of market power.
I see. No, here, for instance, there are two big multiplex cinemas with up-to-date technology and whatnot. One of them practices price discrimination, the other doesn't. But
That's very
admittedly,
interesting.
although admittedly they're not close to each other, they're actually quite
Okay.
far from each other in different neighborhoods. Yeah. And so far, and I got interested into that because I'm interested into promoting several sort of indie movies, and I started getting interested into the industry. And from what I talked with the managers, none of them is complaining about lack of customers. There doesn't seem to be a big difference in number of customers or even revenue, because one of them practices price discrimination and the other doesn't. So I don't know. I mean, there are definitely, the market is very complex, and there are definitely situations where price discrimination doesn't matter at all. In other cases, yeah, it does matter. But the best solution to me is to just let the market function and let the best decisions survive economically, and the worst decision lead to bankruptcy, or
Yeah,
at least severe losses.
and and then in sort of in economic terms, price discrimination is usually efficient. That is, it usually sort of increases the size of the pie. It increases Kaldor-Hicks efficiency, uh, be, because if you have just one single price, there's a lot of people who um, would be willing to pay maybe 70-80% or whatever of the price, who are then priced out of the market when you have a single price. Um, but still the marginal cost of something like a cinema is pretty low. So basically selling these additional seats at maybe 70% of the price is still a good deal for the cinema. So um, it's so using price
True.
discrimination because of obviously you're the sort of discrimination you're using is that you have a lower price for people who are more price sensitive and higher price for people who are less price sensitive.
Hmm.
That generally improves efficiency.
Yes. Yeah, and not only it increases the pie, but it, okay, the cinema example doesn't really apply, but price is also information. For instance, there was in Europe. I've never heard about this kind of scandal, but in the U.S. it happened a few times. A local hardware store and whatnot would suddenly increase its prices once the hurricanes struck or something like that, and they were like, "Oh, that's what did they call
Price
it?
gouging.
Price gouging, or no, predatory pricing." Yeah, that was the formulation. That's a predatory practice. But when you think about it, it's information. It signals that that particular product is not as available as it used to be. And if you want it to at least continue to be available, you're going to have to pay more, so the owner can afford to go into very harsh conditions to bring even more.
Yeah, it's a practice that that alleviates
Hmm.
the shortage, because then people like uh, people think more about using that particular product. If there are substitutes, they will switch to those if
Hmm.
it's reasonably possible for them, and they will use less of the product. And
Hmm.
also, with the higher prices, it now becomes profitable for new producers to come into the market and
Hmm.
to increase supply.
Yes, yes. But then again, you'll have to think through an economic perspective as opposed to through a feelings-based perspective. So yeah, thinking of a feelings-based perspective, I think the oh no no this is not the other one. Uh, is the article with the feelings? Yeah, sorry about discard the last comment. So yeah, let's move to the next one.
Okay, so this is a regional piece from where I live, basically, um, or near where I live. It's from Nordbayern.de. Rape was completely made up. At the end of a second long day of trial, Judge Danny Schaller and prosecutor Laura Heinz were convinced that the young woman's accusations that an older acquaintance had raped her repeatedly over a period of 3 years in her parents' bedroom was a product of her imagination. She was convicted for false allegation and her victim completely rehabilitated. Skipping a few paragraphs here. The verdict itself was mild. The young woman has to do 80 hours of community service and to remain in psychological treatment. After the verdict was read, she collapsed into the protective arms of her father, sobbing. According to two psychiatric experts consulted by the court, the father, who dominates his family, is the main problem. What he saw as affection and nurture might have crushed his insecure daughter, who suffers from low self-esteem, repressed sexuality, and an overwhelming desire to please everyone. Prosecutor Laura Heinz shares that suspicion. On the witness stand, the girl's father painted a picture of an intact and idyllic family and a perfect relationship to his daughter. Um, Only perfect if she did what he told her, others say. If that wasn't the case, he's said to have punished her by withdrawing his affection, while the mother stood by wordlessly. The unfortunate incident began with a conversation the young woman had with a colleague. She told him of someone trying to grope her, but that didn't bother her much, she told him. She said she was used to it since her godmother's husband had been abusing her for years. Tragically, as Judge Shala put it, the confidant did the right thing and contacted the police. Again, skipping a bit, but due to the meticulous work by the Criminal Investigation Department of Regensburg, insoluble contradictions were discovered, and suddenly the tides were turned. The young woman was now charged herself with false allegation. Again, skipping a bit to the end. I am certain, Judge Schaller said in his concluding remarks, that terrible things have been done to you, but not by the man you accused. So
So,
I picked that piece was because it was sort of near where I lived, and also because it's just a perfect example of whenever a woman does something bad, find the nearest male to blame.
yeah, find the nearest male to blame. Absolutely. So the father is at fault because he's caring. and because he maintains a good relationship and a nurturing relationship with his daughter, uh, and he's to blame for that because the daughter lied. What?
I don't know.
What kind of sorcery is this? I mean, seriously, the argument just boggles my mind. What?
It seems like this sort of ideas by these psychologists is that this father has a really domineering personality, and she's just, I don't know, cowed by him or whatever of it. I mean, the whole thing is this article is just like really badly written,
Yeah.
and it was like really a chore to translate that, and so I don't know if the way they're portraying this is just inept, but then they're not really offering any sort of support for the sort of bad things that presumably happened to this woman. Uh, there's no evidence to back up this claim that it's somehow the father's fault.
Yeah, I mean, even if her father is a domineering personality and whatnot, how does that exclude uh, intentionally lying to ruin someone else's life? How does the two aren't mutually inclusive? I mean, they're not related.
Yeah, and it's not like like she thought she had to lie to cover up something else she did or anything like that. It's not. I mean, if it were like a situation where like she had sex with someone and her father found out about that and was outraged or whatever, and then she lied. I mean, I guess I could sort of understand that. I mean, it wouldn't excuse it, but it would at least be somewhat understandable. But here it's like just like a completely random comment. Oh, I guess this guy has raped me for years. Like,
Yeah, the way I see this is that, like, pretty much, for instance, let's say five different people uh, step on my toes, intentionally or not, and I get annoyed by that during the day because it happened five different times in the same day, and I get annoyed, and as a result, somewhere during the night, I just randomly get into someone else's house and rob them and beat the crap out of them. And then I go into court and say, five different people have stepped on my toes today. Have you any idea how terrible day I had?
yeah,
So I had to
terrible.
beat the crap. So I had to beat the crap out of other people on their property and rob them because I was stepped on my toes.
Yeah, but
It.
Yushan, terrible things have certainly been done to you, but not by the man you robbed.
So as a result, you're gonna give me a suspended sentence and 1 hour of community work for the robbing and uh, and the assault.
Yeah, come on,
Oh,
it
oh
was
wait,
80 hours. Come on.
yeah, it doesn't work that way. Jesus Christ. Yeah, the number of excuses is over 9,000. I mean, uh, basically, and I agree with you that you say that the article is written quite inept and difficult to translate. So maybe it's not really that bad as it sounds. But from what I'm getting from your translation is essentially the father is guilty for being nice. Because if she had been so affected by the alleged domineering and oppression that she was subjected to by her evil father, then why the hell collapsed in his arms when finally some consequences were bestowed upon her for her actions?
Yeah, because she has internalized her oppression, of course.
Yeah, sure. I forgot about the
And we know that
internal.
because of reasons.
Yeah, I forgot about the internalized intersectional argument. Yeah, it
Yeah, so
always has to be something. Yeah.
it's just such a good argument because you can prove anything with it.
Yeah, pretty much. Jesus Christ. Okay, speaking of extremely bizarre arguments and reactions, coming back to the United Kingdom, the discussion what that happened in the British Parliament, coming from the Telegraph. What's so funny about a men's rights debate? An extraordinary thing happened in the House of Parliament on Tuesday. A member of the 7-strong backbench business committee burst out laughing at the suggestion that MPs should be allowed to debate a range of gender issues, including domestic violence, suicide, and premature mortality rates. In an age when defending the sensibilities of anti-sexism campaigners can cause Nobel laureates to be sacked and drive astrophysicists with unfortunate dress sense to tears and of redemption, it's a miracle there hasn't been another hysterical lynching in the court of public opinion. At least it would be if it were a male politician caught on camera chortling at the suggestion that Parliament should discuss issues like violence against women, breast cancer screening, and eating disorders. The reason the media hasn't grabbed hold of Sniggergate yet is that the sniggering MP is female and the gender problems she appears to find funny are issues that disproportionately affect men and boys. On the day that Jess Phillips MP sniggered at the suggestion that men's issues should be discussed in Parliament on International Men's Day, another 13 men died from suicide. It's not funny. Not for the men whose lives were lost and not for their friends and family. Suicide is a men's issue, and if we don't talk about the problem, we cannot solve it. On the day the Labour member of Birmingham Yardley clapped her hands over her mouth to stop herself from guffawing at Philip Davis's MP's request for a debate on men's issues, more than 200 men died of cancer. As a nation, we spend more time, money, and energy trying to prevent, detect, and cure female cancers in the United Kingdom. And yet men are 58% more likely to die of cancer before the age of 65 than women. I don't think that's hilarious. Not for the men who die before their time and not for the loved ones they leave behind. Men of all classes have a lower life expectancy than women of the same background. It's a men's issue, and like all men's issues, we cannot solve it if we don't discuss it. Skipping a bit, International Men's Day on the 19th of November is the perfect time for MPs to discuss a whole host of seriously unfunny issues facing men and boys in 2015. There are many different factors causing issues like these, but one thing unites them all. We're not so concerned about addressing these issues because we're collectively more tolerant of the harm that happens to men and boys. This tolerance is held in place by the underlying threat that anyone who tries to highlight these issues will be met with derision and ridicule. I've been promoting the celebration of International Men's Day in the United Kingdom since 2010, and each year at least one high-profile woman will use it as an opportunity to denigrate men. In 2013, for example, it was the blogger journalist Fleet Street Fox who wrote that men should take a break from raping for the day. Now we have a female politician in a position of power and privilege sniggering at men's problems and opposing the discussion of men's issues in Parliament on International Men's Day, because there are more male MPs than female MPs. It's a ludicrous position to take. As Philip Davis rightly argued, there's a very big difference between men raising issues and the raising of men's issues. Both male and female MPs discuss women's issues on International Women's Day and have a monthly session of question about women and equality. Our collective inability to provide political space for men's issues to be discussed too, particularly on International Men's Day, is a sign of a nation that's content to turn a blind eye to everyday sexism against men and boys. But maybe this year we can make a difference. If you agree with me that men's issues should be discussed in Parliament, why not write your member of the Parliament and ask him or her to support Phil Davis' call for a debate on International Men's Day on November 19th? Sure, they might just snigger at you like Jess Phillips, but maybe, just maybe, they'll show themselves to be a true egalitarian who believes in equality for everyone, including the men and boys they represent. Now, in all fairness, the article is quite bad in many respects, and that's because it's written by Glenn Poole, an individual whose columns I routinely promote, even though I generally disagree with him. But you know, he kind of has a point. I mean, if we're gonna play this pretend game, at least let's play it consistently.
What pretend game do you mean?
This pretend game that we're all egalitarians and
okay.
Yeah, because you know his closing statement is yeah, maybe they'll show themselves to be a true egalitarian. Yeah, no. But whatever, if we're going to play this game, at least let's play it consistently. Other than that, yeah, sure. Why shouldn't the Parliament have a discussion on men's issues on International Men's Day? Why not?
Yeah, the one point where I take issue with this article is that it uses the word issue like 100 times It's
Yeah.
really annoying afterwards. Like, issue this, issue that. Everything's an issue.
Yes, I agree, and that's probably because Glenn Poole comes from the school of thought that addressing things in terms of liberty or rights is problematic. You know, it's the school of thought to which Glenn Poole adheres. He also sniggers, to use his terminology. He also sniggers at the terminology men's rights. So yeah, there you go. That's probably the reason why he's been using issue like 100 times during the article. Okay, I'm exaggerating, not 100 times, but 15 times at least.
Yeah, like the word issue is just so nondescript. It's just it doesn't tell you anything. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it's like a thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also, it doesn't convey the seriousness of the matter at hand, because for instance, men perceive slightly less colors on average than women. That's a men's issue, but it's not necessarily a problem or a matter of men's rights or something that the parliament can legitimately address. That's why it's confusing to use the terminology men's issues, because it's, as you said, it's not descriptive, and it also doesn't convey any sort of seriousness.
Oh, it's certainly an issue that Parliament can address. They can just sort of ban certain colors, for example. That sort of seems to be in the spirit of what the UK is doing these days.
Although, in all fairness, the banning of
Let's how about we just ban red and green because a lot of men have trouble keeping the two apart.
I see what you did there. Yeah. Apparently, they have a poll there, and last time I looked, there were like 2,500, 2,600 people who had voted in the poll. And the question was, should the parliament debate men's rights on International Men's Day? And 97% answered yes, because they do it on International Women's Day as well. And 3% said, no, come on, that's laughable. Men are hegemonic. I have a feeling that the one who made the poll had a lot less concern for PR issues with the feminists and the progressives and the rest of the freaks than Glenn Poole.
Yeah,
The way
yeah.
he phrased the answer is clearly ironic, and rubbed it into the face of social justice warriors. And also, the one who phrased the poll had no problem in using terminology men's rights as opposed to the PR wishy-washy men's issues terminology.
And yeah, and I mean they did use the term men's rights in the headlines. So of course we
But
don't know if Glenn Poole actually wrote that. Because
yeah,
often that's an editor that decides the headline.
yep, yeah, but I'm pretty sure the headline wasn't decided by Glenn. Now, again, I don't particularly despise Glenn, but I usually disagree with him. Uh,
That seems to be like a dabbing with faint praise. I don't particularly despise you.
but I mean, I can't say that I'm particularly, how should I say, sympathetic to Glenn. I really don't like his way of phrasing things. Like, most of the times I find myself either slightly or fundamentally disagreeing with him, because he has, let's face it, he has a progressive social justice warrior type of analysis. And not only I think that's counterproductive, but I think it's pathetic.
I don't know if it's really counterproductive. Um, I do think that having these kinds of voices is also valuable because it's sort of covering all fronts and
Hmm.
making arguments from many sort of different points of view is generally a good thing. Uh, and there's a certain kind of person who can be reached with this more upfront, confrontational style of argument, as you see it on AVFM, for example. And then there's other people who respond more positively to this kind of rhetoric. So I think it's a good thing that people like Glenn Poole exist and are writing articles like these.
Hmm. Yeah, that's why I keep promoting his columns even when I disagree. Yeah, it's obvious that within the non-feminist sector of the society, there is a larger diversity of opinions and whatnot. But this phrasing of the sniggergate and the I don't know. Am I the only one who rolls his eyes whenever I see this?
I don't know if he's really being serious with this Sniggergate thing. Uh, I think it's sort of more ironic. They're sort of trying to poke fun at people who think that everything is a scandal and a
Yeah, and the gate,
huge issue,
particularly.
as he likes to put it.
Yeah, and everything is something that ends with the gate.
Yes, yes.
Although Glenn, you can see that Glenn is a bit old. I mean, he forgot the hashtag in front of it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That definitely huge oversight.
I mean, what doesn't have a hashtag in front of it doesn't exist these days. Whenever I see this kind of trend, I always remind myself of that meme with the song written by Mozart. I think it was like he was using hashtags before it was cool. So yeah. Go ahead.
Never mind. That sort of joke doesn't work in English. Sorry.
Nah.
Because I was making some sort of a joke with cis, which is what C sharp is called in German, but then I remember that it's different in English, so never mind.
Yeah. On the other hand, I looked through the through the YouTube feed of this particularly sniggering member of the parliament, and that woman is hilarious in and of herself. I mean, if you look at her Twitter feed, sometimes I think of myself, come on, this has to be a troll. Come on, this can't be a legit member of the parliament of a serious nation. This has to be a troll.
But that would be some really good trolling if you actually managed to get into the House of Commons as a troll. That would be some serious dedication.
I mean, if you compare her Twitter feed with the Twitter feed of Jessica Valenti looks like the enlightened one, and we know that Jessica Valenti is a troll. I mean, seriously, it's just so particularly bad and so particularly idiotic. I mean, it's not the problem that she's from the Labour Party, although that's part of the problem. But even things that are not related to partisan politics, the way she takes on things is so particularly childish and idiotic that I'm like, how do these people get voted?
Do you have some example on hand?
Yeah, there was no, I don't have it, but I do remember it was like her legit answer approved by her what do they call it, council something, the one who essentially oversees through the social media communications of a public official, and her legit argument was that like I'm going now to take care of the jobs in my constituencies, which are predominantly male, so you see I don't hate men. And then, well, look, I have 2 sons, so I definitely don't hate men. I just, and the answers were like, yeah, you just happen to deride the very idea of discussing why, for instance, your constituency has a high suicide rate, most of it male. And
and best friends are men.
Yeah, and that kind of argument is so particularly childish. I mean, there is that say, which I don't think it can be translated in English perfectly, but if essentially, if you were to shut up, you might have still remained a philosopher. I mean, if she hadn't said anything, it would have definitely been better for her and for her public image. I mean, if the whole saga would have been, oh yeah, well, she just laughed in the parliament and whatnot, and that's it. No reactions on social media, no nothing, no further comments. It would not have been a problem to begin with. The papers wouldn't have written about it. Nothing would have happened.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, sure, Glenpool would have written something on his own publication, but that would be pretty much it. We wouldn't have reached prominence.
Yeah, and no one much would really care.
Yep. Okay, let's go to the next one. The next one is particularly interesting from a legal perspective. It's one of those cases that don't really happen, but when they do. Coming from Bergen-Savisen in Norway, a woman doesn't want to know who is the father of her daughter. She refuses paternity test. A few weeks after the woman gave birth to a daughter at the women's clinic in Bergen, the possible child's father came to announce himself. For 4 years, the woman has refused to give a blood test in the paternity case. The very special case has now been through 2 courts. The case has dragged on that much because the case law is scarce in this area. In most cases, it tends to be the opposite, namely that the alleged fathers are reluctant to establish whether they are the biological father of a child or not. When the woman in her 20s gave birth to a healthy daughter 4 years ago, she gave no information about who is the father of the child. 3 weeks later, the NIV administration was approached by a man who recommended himself as the possible father of the baby girl. He submitted a blood sample. The child's mother, however, asked through a lawyer that the NIV drop the case. She is not sure if the man is the father of the child, but fears what will happen if the paternity test is positive, court documents reveal. The child's mother accuses the man of allegedly threatening her and being violent towards her when they were in a relationship. The woman believes that this individual is obsessed with the child. He is a foreign national, and the mother believes that this man's only purpose in any paternity case is to use this to get to Norway. The woman fears for her own mental health and that the child could be kidnapped. According to the Children Act, though, the court may hand to the mother of the child, to the child himself, and to every man who is a party in the case, an order to hand over a suitable sample for DNA analysis. The central question in this case is whether there are compelling reasons to put off the case, a question that neither the Bergen District Court nor now the Vâlsan appeal court could properly answer. Judges understand that there will be a great burden for the woman, but the court writes, quote, "The government's responsibility is to establish paternity. However, in a case of such nature, additional concerns must also be weighed upon," states the Vâlsan appeal court. The court notes that the public has the responsibility to determine its paternity. Bergen-Savisen was Saturday night in contact with the child and the mother's lawyer. She cannot yet comment on the court's decision. The decision is not definitive and can be appealed to the Supreme Court if necessary.
Interesting case.
Yeah, interesting because it's rare. I don't think it's really that rare. Maybe it's rare in Norway, but it's not particularly rare. I mean, these kinds of cases are quite often encountered in France, but then again, France is what? 12 times bigger than Norway in terms of population, so yeah, maybe as a rate per 100,000 people, it's still rare in France as well. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what to say.
Yeah, though I don't really follow this this idea that he's obsessed with this child. I mean, knowing whether a particular child is yours is, I think, a quite natural impulse, and
Yes.
I don't think that this means that you're obsessed or anything like that.
Or even if it does, I don't think that's something bad. Also, I'm not particularly following this argument that, oh, well, the individual is a foreign national and wants to establish paternity to get to Norway. Well, for starters, he's been suing your ass for 4 years. I mean, that definitely implies both that he already is in Norway, and secondly, if that was his only chance to stay in Norway, he would have been deported by now. The immigration laws in Norway are extremely tight. You don't get yourself oppholdstillatelse, the residence permit, essentially. You don't get that for prolonged for 4 years just because you have a paternity case. So, I mean, the argument doesn't stand. Without even knowing whether it's true or not. Yeah, maybe the guy is a total asshole, and yeah, maybe the risk of kidnapping is real. Probably, I don't know. I don't think so, but let's assume that's true. The argument that his only purpose in any paternity case is to use this to get to Norway, it doesn't stand, that particular argument. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I don't know. That part seemed quite strange to me, like the sort of appealing to xenophobic sentiments that, I don't know, the dirty foreigners are trying to steal our children.
Yeah, but again, what if it's his child as well?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I mean, even from a xenophobic perspective, it still doesn't make sense. I mean, if it's his child as well, well, maybe, just maybe, we should at least find out that. I mean, I agree with the judge in here. You know, it's the public has the responsibility to determine the paternity. Uh, you know, why is this contempt for objective facts? And credit to the journalist. And I've seen this becoming quite a trend on Bergen Savis, and at least on these issues. Uh, the journalist is as impartial as he can get. I mean, he said, "Look, we tried to contact the mother. We looked into the court documents. Here's a little of overview." I didn't sense any sort of bias in it. I mean, even there with the use this to get to Norway, whatever, he puts the mother in there.
Yep, yep.
It's not the opinion of the journalist. So yeah, in this regard, kudos to the journalist. But I don't understand why a significant portion, because I looked for this article on social media and see what other people said about it, and the amount of contempt for objective facts is staggering. And I was looking through, especially on Facebook. It's nice to see that many Scandinavians tend not to have privacy settings. As such, you can look at you can get an idea of who that person is, and you were looking at the most obnoxious and downright hateful comments, and then you look onto their profiles, and most of them were these progressive citizens of the world type. So, and I was looking, why is this contempt for the facts? Because this dispute could be over if the paternity test turns out negative.
Yeah.
But I guess that's why the contempt, because presumably the mother of the child is quite convinced that it won't turn out negative.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, the next one is from the silly place, isn't it?
Definitely from the very silly place.
Okay.
From Beats at Berlin. New street can only be named after lesbian. It's going to be good. There is a new street near the Mercedes-Benz Arena in Friedrichshain and a new public footway near the Church of the Holy Cross in Kreuzberg. Both are to be named. Both are to have female names, as all new street names in Kreuzberg must be female. This has been decided by the Assembly of District Representatives back in 2005. Now local politicians have adopted an even stricter law which determines that one of the new street names must be of a lesbian woman. Max Putzer of the SPD, that is the Social Democrats, proposed that notion, and a large majority voted in its favor. Only the CDU was opposed. The CDU are the conservatives. The SPD motion even decides which lesbians are to be considered based on an expertise by the Gay Museum, which recommended these names: Freya Eisner, Selma Engler, Charlotte Hamm, Audre Lorde, Christa Winslow, and Erna Hiller. I wanted to know what role these women played in Berlin and what their significance was. I found references to their biographies in a paper of the Senate Administration for Labor, Integration and Women entitled Memories of Lesbians, Gays, Bisexuals, Trans and Intersexual People. Freya Eisner, 1907 to 1989, was the daughter of a Bavarian socialist, Kurt Eisner. In the 20s, Selma Engler, 1899 to 1982, published the Blätter idealer Frauenfreundschaft, which is something like papers of ideal women's friendship, in Berlin. What she did then is irritating. In 1933, she wrote a play titled Heil Hitler and sent it directly to Hitler. In 1938, she applied to and was accepted in the Reichsschrifttumskammer, which was reserved for artists who towed the line.
What a sweetie.
Yeah. Also, this play was rejected by the Nazi government, but they said that sort of on ideological terms it was unobjectionable, but they just sort of rejected it out for literary merits. So yeah, definitely someone who needs a street named after her. Continuing with the article. Charlotte Kahn, 1890 to 1967, liked to wear men's clothing and founded the transvestite club Dion in Dresden. Audre Lorde, 1934 to 1992, was a lesbian feminist from New York who gave guest lectures at the Freie Universität Berlin starting in 1984. Christa Winslow, 1888 to 1944, lived with women and didn't have anything to do with Berlin. Erna Hiller, dates unknown, lived in Solmstrasse 12 and was active in homosexual associations in her spare time. 5 of these 6 women didn't play any important role for Berlin. One of them played a very strange role during the Nazi years. Why should we name a street after them? Just because they were lesbians? Quote, a street name is supposed to honor a person who has achieved great things, not to honor someone for their sexual orientation, CDU politician Timur Hussein from Kreuzberg said. I have nothing more to add. Sexual orientation is a private matter, just like faith or way of life. After all, we don't name streets after people just because they are Christians, Jews, Muslims, cyclists, or vegans. This decision is so absurd that it could only have come from Kreuzberg.
Calling streets on using the names of people just because they were vegetarians, that sounds like a fabulous idea. I could totally see that happening.
I know that there's this one particular vegetarian who was a very influential German politician. I think his name starts with an H or something. Something like that.
Yeah. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. What I wanted to say is that if a country in Europe will ever have a green majority in a local government or national government, I could totally see that happening. I could totally see an ideological greenie trying to push such an angle. So the CDU politician Mr. Hussein is not uh, particularly off the mark. In all seriousness,
there's actually one Bundesland in Germany which has currently a green majority.
Really?
I forget which one it was, but in that particular Bundesland, the Greens are sort of more moderate types. They're not the sort of social justice warrior type fanatics, but more sort of reasonable environmentalists who are sort of who you can work with basically. And but yeah,
that pretty much explains why they were voted in to begin with.
Yeah. Or basically, I guess sort of once you become sort of majority party, you sort of have to settle down a bit. Just like basically happened when the Greens were the junior partners in the coalition with the Social Democrats, a couple of years ago. Then the Greens, when they were part of the governments, they had to be, a bit more reasonable and settle down a bit.
A bit, but not too much. Also, what is the regime of the museums in Berlin? Are they state operated, state owned, or they're largely private, like in Amsterdam?
I think most of them, like it sort of depends. A lot of them are operated by the city. Some of them are operated privately, but then usually they are also supported by public money to some extent. It sort of differs.
No,
I'm not sure about this gay museum there.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. The idea of having the taxpayers support such thing as the gay museum, I find that totally appalling. I mean, what? Why? why? First of all, why would you have that? But secondly, okay, if you want to have that on your own time and on your own time and your own resources, then yeah, who am I to question it? But what would be next? I mean, if a gay museum is appropriate for taxpayer support, then I don't know, why not the vegetarian museum? Why not I don't know, the rock metal listener museum? Uh, why not the vegan museum, the raw vegan museum? Uh, all of these seem perfectly
Or
legitimate choices.
the museum for people that only eat things that don't cast a shadow.
Yeah.
But I guess it's a sort of more general argument against having these kinds of things funded by the
Yeah.
taxpayer. Like if you're talking about, say, I don't know, a historical museum, well, lots of people don't care about history and don't want to go to a historical museum. Why should they be forced to fund that?
Yeah, but even from a more statist perspective, which is usually the case with the uh, parties such as the CDU, it makes sense in a way, at least partially, to have a national history museum or something like that. Not too many of them and not too costly, but having one or two such museums isn't particularly disturbing. You won't see many people protesting Uh, the existence of such a museum. It's useful. You take the kids once or twice in a lifetime in there and things like that. You'll be very hard pressed to fund the movement to oppose the existence of a history museum. On the other hand, when you go into very controversial and very niche topics, that's a little bit more complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. But then there's of course a lot more historical museums than game museums. So I don't know. It's not something that I'm particularly offended by.
The reason why I bring up this question is because wasn't it in Berlin that push for the um, for it was the what was it was gay education that's for 7-year-olds or something like that. You brought the news
No,
a while ago.
that's not from Berlin. I keep mixing up my Bundesland all the time. But it's a different Bundesland, not Berlin.
Okay, okay, so yeah, but still, I mean, it's very easy to make up this argument. I mean, why are we becoming why are we making these kinds of things, these kinds of special provisions? Uh, And I like that this article is particularly going through all the proposals, and they were like, look, 5 of these had no influential, what had nothing to do whatsoever with Berlin, and the sixth one was a Nazi apparatchik, essentially,
Well,
uh,
not an apparatchik, but a
a
sympathizer.
sympathizer in the was that league that you said that was reserved for the
The
artists who.
Reichsschriftumkammer, which is like the uh, I don't know how to say that exactly, but it's like yeah, but she was definitely apparently a Nazi sympathizer and also someone who like is not really very important person or anything like that. Like I looked up her Wikipedia page and it's like basically um, after 38 there's like no records of her doing anything of any note. Like no one
Yeah,
like
so it's
all we basically know after that is that she died in when was it 82, and that's basically all we know of her after the 30s.
Yeah, so maybe she aimed at becoming member of the Reichsschriftumskammer, just because there were some perks in there and whatnot, and
Yeah,
then
I don't know. That's definitely possible that she was
when the
not.
ghost. And I see that as credible because there was in here as well the League of Communist Writers. And many of the writers in there have essentially similar biographies. They tried really, really hard to get into the league, and then they went ghost, essentially. And that was because being a member in there provided some minor perks and whatnot, but they were quite useful um, to have an ID identifying you as the member of that particular league. But then they stopped writing altogether because there was no condition to keep on writing.
Yeah, maybe it's something like that.
So yeah, that's why I think it's entirely possible. But still, I mean, if that is the case, and there's nothing significant to be noted about the individual after joining that particular club, that pretty much proves the point that is not worthy enough for uh, naming a street after them, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's all these really famous lesbians who don't have any streets named after them. No, they just have to dig, pretty deep from the bottom of the barrel to dredge up even six names.
Yeah, that's it's grasping at straws in here. And again, uh, why this does this push that you must have streets named after women? Why?
I don't claim to understand that.
I mean, seriously, why? And I do remember that it is a particular push in general in Berlin, just like in Paris more recently. Although in Paris it's failing, but whatever. It's not like the Paris local government is known for its efficiency or whatnot. So failure is pretty much the standard. But anyway, why this push to have more streets named after women? What one of my American friends who is an immigrant here was like, back in my hometown, it's essentially street 1, 2, 3, and until and until I don't know a few hundred or something, and that's it. And it's only divided into avenues and boulevards, and there is no street name. It's the 43rd Avenue and things like that. And they don't seem to have this problem. Now, definitely that could not happen in Europe, at least not over time. But why does this really matter?
I don't really know.
Yeah, okay, maybe one day we'll understand. I sincerely doubt, but whatever. Okay, the last one, also from the very, very silly place.
Okay, this last one is from The Guardian. It's time to do away with the concept of manhood altogether. Men are pretty terrible people. They commit significantly more violent crimes, robberies, and assaults each year than women do, according to the Department of Justice. They are more likely to show anger in the workplace and be rewarded for it, while women are affected negatively for the same behaviors. They even take up too much space on public transportation when manspreading. I could keep going. Men probably dominate all these terrible statistics because now and throughout history they've dominated the world, but that doesn't give them a pass. They are still to blame even if they don't know better, and it's high time their dominant position, their entitled ignorance, was questioned and dismantled. There is a manhood in crisis trend story to match each one pondering whether women can have it all. But manhood isn't in crisis. It is the crisis. Still, last week author and activist Kevin Powell published an essay at CNN where he announced, yet again, that manhood is in the society's crosshairs and recommended a way to fix it. Powell recently released a memoir about his journey to manhood, wrote about spending time on a college campus working with male college students to find a resolution to the endless rape allegations there. He asked a group of men to name important women in history, which they did, but when pressed on what these women did, the men really couldn't respond. This lack of actually knowing women's lives led Powell to the conclusion that if these men couldn't connect or care to intimately know about women's lives, they weren't able to respect them enough not to perpetrate violence against their bodies. This led him to a call for re-education of men. He argues that men, quote, actually need to learn about the contributions of women and girls to every aspect of American society, end quote, as a tactic to stop the violence. That is, they needed to learn that there is more to women than a reproductive system. This is theoretically a good next step to stopping the violence that is polluting not just college campuses, but the entire world. But it's very us and them, rather than we're all human together. It just lets men be more educated about the women they are perpetrating violence against. Until men en masse consider women to be part of the same ecosystem, masculinity will continue to be primarily a rejection of everything feminine, the tool men use to measure and gauge their own self-worth to other men, the foundation of bro culture. And until then, when they feel that their masculinity is in jeopardy, when they don't feel man enough, manly violence will seem like a reasonable way to react to their feelings. Violence is often the single most evident marker of manhood, sociologist Michael Kimmel wrote in his 1994 essay Masculinity as Homophobia. Quote, "It is the willingness to fight, the desire to fight." He is correct. We see this violence from the bar fights over small issues to the violence that breaks out on the streets when men are denied by women their catcall. We've seen this recently with the high rate of reported transgender murders in the US. The number sits at 22 so far this year, according to the National Anti-Violence Project. Many times when reporting has shown, these women are murdered not for being transgender, but because their male lovers fear being found out, fear their masculinity being called into question. All of this was humorously replied in the viral hashtag #MasculinitySoFragile, which through humor showed how men will respond so quickly, even violently, when they feel their manhood is being questioned, which seems to happen a lot. Instead of constantly putting manhood under perceived threat, we must rethink the concept entirely, and maybe, to be so daring, throw it out. Because we have centuries of war, of pillaging, of violence that show us that manhood was never in crisis, but always was central to this mayhem. So we may need to just rebuild everything with the whole concept of manhood excluded.
I'm sorry, I can't take this serious. I mean, can you?
Yeah, this article is just filled with so many fallacies and bad arguments. I just don't even know where to start. Just at the beginning, it's just it almost seems like this article is going to be a satire when among the 3 or 4 most important issues, the last one he mentions is manspreading. I mean, and then he says I could keep going with all these important problems like men taking up too much space on public transportation, and as judged by pictures taken of them spreading their legs when the carriage is half empty and there's plenty of space anyway. So obviously it's hegemonic masculinity oppressing everyone or something.
You forgot to introduce people of color in there, so definitely you're a racist.
Yeah, but I would actually guess that black men are more likely to manspread. I don't have any data to back that up, but it's probably just because I'm a horrible racist that I think this.
Yeah, the portion that annoyed me the most is where is the okay, here it is. He asked a group of men to name important women in history, which they did. But when pressed on what these women did, they really couldn't respond. This leads to the conclusion that if these men couldn't connect or care to intimately know about women's lives, they weren't able to respect them enough not to perpetrate violence against their bodies. Now, the logical conclusion of this paragraph is that not knowing details about Marie Curie makes you a necrophile.
I wouldn't even say that you can draw any logical conclusions from this argument, because it's just it's riddled with holes like a Swiss cheese. I mean, okay, first of all, yeah, people couldn't tell you the details about what these women did, but I guess that's probably true to a comparable extent when you ask people about some famous men from history, like people remember these names. Lots of people know the name, say Aristotle, but try getting the average man on the street to explain to you what Aristotle did or what influence his ideas had on philosophy or whatever, and people probably wouldn't know the first thing about it. And they've heard these names, I don't know, Charlemagne or whatever. They probably know that he was some sort of king or emperor, whatever, but they have no idea what he actually did. That doesn't mean that they want to perpetrate violence against him.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, for instance, if you go, even if you go into the birthplace of Nikola Tesla in Belgrade, and if you ask people, have you ever heard about Nikola Tesla? They'll probably 99% of the people say yes. But what did he do? At
Some
best,
sort of scientist guy.
yeah, some sort of scientist or something with electricity, and that would be the best case scenario. Uh, that those particular interviews that this Kevin Powell, I think, yeah, um, that the interviews that he claims he did, we don't know if he actually did them or not, but whatever, don't particularly prove anything.
I guess they only prove that people don't know a lot about history, but then we already knew that.
Yeah, they also prove that the grass is green and that the water is wet. Um, I just can't take it seriously. I mean, it's so particularly asinine that, yeah, other than what I did in my video to essentially replace men with niggers, uh, I don't know what else to say. I mean, and besides the fact that it is horribly misandric, it's just completely idiotic. And the sad part is that many people told me that, well, look at the comments that he's getting a new asshole torn by the comments at the Guardian. And I looked through the comments, and that's not exactly true. I mean, yeah, sure, half of the comments were like, this author is an idiot, which is okay, but the other half are like, yeah, well, I agree with the premise, but the phrasing is bad. And they're arguing semantics in there. They're not arguing from a more reality-oriented perspective, which is, come on, seriously, manspreading and people not knowing things about historical figures, that's your best argument?
I mean, there was a little bit of an argument there that men are more likely to commit violent crimes and robberies and so on, and men are responsible for most of the wars in history and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's
Mm-hmm.
certainly true, but also men are responsible for most of the good things that happen throughout history. So I
Yeah,
guess it sort of balances out.
there's that, and not only it balances out, it significantly outpaces the negatives, as we proved quite a bit in our show, Great Men of History. But besides that, how is this supposed to be? I mean, either this article is an academic way of hashtag kill all men, but in a with more progressive lingo. Uh, that would be the only way to read it, because this thing that by the deconstructing manhood and what, come on, this is social constructivist mumbo jumbo. It has nothing to do with reality.
I mean, it is true that there are certain aspects of masculinity that are definitely problematic, as these kinds of people like to put it, and that are definitely negative, and that are definitely a problem that we should address, but we should do it in a sort of reasonable and balanced way, not just saying, manhood per se is the root of all evil, but rather we should say, it has these specific kinds of problems that we should work on, which is, which is a much more reasonable approach that, where you can actually get people to work with you instead of just saying that you're evil um, and your whole sex or your whole gender, as they would probably put it, is just fundamentally flawed. If you take this kind of approach, you're just bound to get a negative and hostile reaction, and it couldn't be any other way.
Yeah, and this random pandering to the tranny lobby, just randomly dropping that, 22 trannies were killed in the United States just this year alone, according to whatever. And I'm like, okay, that's terrible for the 22 victims, but let's put that a bit into perspective. How many murders have happened in the United States until now? This year alone, and they're like 10,000.
Yeah, but
Okay, so 22 out of 10,000, it doesn't seem particularly extraordinary. And then, of course, the counter argument is, yeah, well, but trannies are not such a huge demographic. Okay, they're not. But even if you look at the most optimistic statistic, that is, I think it's something like 1 in 1,000 people are trannies. Okay, let's run with that, which is the activist number pulled within the tranny community. Okay, even if it's 1 in 1,000, still 22 victims in a year is not. It's actually below the average, the national average in the United States. Trannies are significantly underrepresented amongst murder victims, and I would say that's a fabulous thing. But somehow they managed to make it a bad thing.
Have you actually seen statistics like that? As far as I know, uh, per capita, the murder rate for transgender people is a lot higher than
On
the
average,
general public.
for 10 or 15 years, yes. But if you look in any other tranny sympathetic place except transadvocate.org, which is a particularly social justice warrior type of place, which should not be taken seriously, even if you're sympathetic to tranny issues. If you look in any other place from the so-called LGBT community, they all say that transgender people are like 1 in 1,000. So if it's 1 in 1,000, you can kind of guesstimate how many transgender people are in the United States. And then when you put 22 victims in a year, or at least in 10 months, how much have passed since the beginning of this year, and then compare it with in a per 100,000 rate with I don't know, blacks or whites and whatnot, you will see that blacks are a little bit overrepresented. And the transgenders are significantly underrepresented, even compared to the national average, using their own numbers. So,
okay, that's weird.
So I mean, and also if you look closely, some other places, particularly in the British media, they do that. They say, oh, that the murder rate for transgender is significantly higher than for any other demographic. And when you check out their sources, they're usually using a UN source, which usually calculates for like 50 or 60 nations at a time, or sometimes even more than that. I can totally believe that globally that is the case, but it doesn't mean it always has to be the case in all countries. And apparently, at least this year in the United States, that's not the case at all. And even left-wing frequent commentators of The Guardian have called this author on that point, and some of them ended up being banned, even though they were subscribed users. That's amazing.
Yeah, that is sort of one of my pet peeves, of just sort of people just throwing these kinds of numbers out without providing any sort of context, and often in a misleading way. If you tell me, 22 people were killed in this particular time span, I've as a normal person, I have no idea whether that's a lot, whether that's a little. You have to have some sort of comparison that I don't know that's compared to
Compared
so
to
and so
what?
many per 100,000 in the general population or something like that. If you just throw out, so and so many people, that tells me nothing.
I usually apply the Thomas Sowell test on any idea that I encountered, and it's essentially uh, ask the three questions, and one of the three questions is compared to what? I mean, whenever someone tells you, this thing is worse than is significantly bad, and I'm like, okay, it's bad, but compared to what?
Yep, it's
Because
definitely a
and
very
that's again,
important question to ask whenever you basically anything.
yeah, but then again, that's for people who work under the presumption that there is no such thing as perfect. Uh, but apparently on the far left, I should say, because come on, there are some reasonable leftists out there, but on the far left, the kinds of people who write on the Guardian, it seems to me that for them, perfect can exist somehow. We can create paradise on Earth or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that article falls under that category, but apparently before we get to paradise, we have to get rid of manhood somehow.
Yeah, and even if you apply progressive logic, it's like, okay, and how would you do that? And just rebuild everything with the whole concept of manhood excluded. That also comes with the premise that everything is being destroyed now, which it's not actually true. It's systematic. Many social structures are indeed systematically being undermined, but that doesn't mean they are destroyed.
Yeah, and I mean this whole all, all these bad things he mentions, violence and crime and war and so on. All these are declining. There's less and less of that as we move forward, and it's always this idea that we are in a crisis when actually things are getting better for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part, although some areas of the world are getting worse, and apparently, as of I think last year or early this year, violence globally has started to rise again. Not
Okay,
by
interesting.
much, not by much, but the trend is no longer consistent with the Steven Pinker type of analysis that was indeed correct when it appeared in 2010. But still, I mean, from a this guy who wrote this article is American, writing in a British paper. In Britain, the amount of violence has been declining and it continues to decline. In the US is the same thing, and continental Europe is the same thing. I mean, yeah, sure, there is the problem in eastern Ukraine, but for the most part, even with that conflict, is still a significantly less amount of violent deaths compared to on a historical scale.
Yeah, yeah, and also this whole thing that um, that until men en masse consider women to be part of the same ecosystem. Well, what does he mean by that?
Yeah, well, rats are also part of the same ecosystem,
I mean, yeah,
unless it has a different definition for ecosystem.
men and women generally tend to live in the same places, eat the same kinds of foods, and so on. So I guess they're part of the same ecosystem. But I guess that's not what he means. He means some sort of metaphor, but I can't really decipher what he means here.
Yeah, in a literal sense, yes, but I don't think there's anyone on the planet actually denying that.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe he means in sort of kind of economic ecosystem or something like that. But then also, women are obviously part of that because uh, just through being parts of families, they participate in the same sort of economic quote unquote ecosystem um, with men, and they often work in the same kinds of places as men do, and so on. So it's obviously in that sense too, women are part of the same ecosystem. I just can't figure out what he actually means here.
I have to admit that I can't wrap my head around that. Also, we should note that this he quotes an utter failure of the social justice warriors as a great success, showing whatever. He quotes the viral hashtag masculinity so fragile, which through humor showed how men will respond quickly and violently when they feel their manhood is being questioned. Actually, that's not true. If you scroll a little bit through that, you will see quite a lot of women in there mocking the social justice warrior position. And most of the tweets in there, regardless of who sent them, are mocking the social justice warrior premise. It was an utter failure from a PR perspective.
But you see that it's just because men are so fragile they can't even take this sort of Twitter hashtag mocking them, and they have to send in their patriarchal slaves to mock people who mock masculinity. So it just shows that it's extra fragile.
Yeah, it sounds like that the other circular logic that actually has a name, but I forgot the name. The circular logic is the comment section of an article about feminism proves that there is a need for feminism. It actually has a name. It's called something, someone's theory or someone's hypothesis. That kind of circular logic, and I find that particularly funny when it comes from people who otherwise claim themselves to be skeptics and obsessed with logic and you know promoters of reason. Then that's particularly the case in the atheism plus community, and yet they have no problem employing outright circular logic.
Yeah, and the thing is that reason and logic and so on are really hard. It's really hard
Yes.
to do it well, and I mean it's easy to use logic to deconstruct arguments you disagree with. That part isn't very hard. The hard part is using reason and logic and rationality to question your own arguments and the arguments made by people that you generally agree with. That is the
Mhm.
hard part, and that is what not what people who promote themselves as rational and skeptical and so on fail at, along with basically everyone else.
Yeah, you pretty much make the case that the so-called skeptics aren't actually special snowflakes. They're normal people like the rest of them. You just stole their victimhood card. You're such a
Yeah,
mean person today.
sorry. After the show, I will go back to flagellating myself.
Yeah, make sure to get a proper whip. Jesus Christ. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to say. I mean, the absurdity of this, and you know what's the sad part is that if it hadn't been published on the Guardian, I would have dismissed the entire article as like, yeah, satire.
Yeah, like halfway through, I still wasn't quite sure whether it's satire or not. It's
Yeah, and no, it's not satire. I looked
yeah.
through other writings of this author. No, he's legit. I mean, he definitely believes what he writes. That
I
doesn't mean
guess it's
he's
post-law in action.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, although to be fair, I did not dismiss it as satire at all, and I never questioned the legitimacy of it because it's on the Guardian, and the Guardian thoroughly vets its writers to toe the line as much as possible in other places as well. Of an acquaintance of mine, of left winger, submitted something, a very decent article on the Guardian. I think it was on the Islamic State issue, and they rejected it not because the article was bad; it had passed the review successfully, but because they found a Facebook post of him that was offensive, and therefore it's un-okay to give him a platform on the Guardian. The Guardian has a very strict process of vetting their writers to toe the party line to the letter. So that's why when I see such stupidity on the Guardian, I don't assume it's satire because it's very unlikely to be satire. The Guardian is not known for having a sense of humor. And particularly in the feminist section of the website, that portion of the publication is definitely sense of humor free.
Yeah.
And somehow, okay, here's patriarchy in action. This guy succeeds, sorry, in being even more retarded than Jessica Valenti. That's a performance, isn't it? It is a performance.
Yeah, yeah. I guess he couldn't have done it without his privilege.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And although he's a mixed race, it was definitely his white privilege that allowed him to achieve this level and outpace, sorry, Jessica Valenti.
Yeah, so basically has half of white privilege plus male privilege. That's probably better than one full white privilege.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's privilege plus plus.
So he basically has like 1.5 privilege points at least, whereas Jessica Valenti only has 1.
Yep, yep. Ah, okay. I think that's enough for tonight. We've been going on for what, 1 hour and 50 something? Yeah, that's more than enough. Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
I have one more thing to add, which is to take the red pill.
Yep, take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone. Mr. Huff, please take us out.